Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. You know what's funny about diplomatic missions? They're supposed to be boring. Paperwork, handshakes, maybe some awkward small talk over exotic beverages that taste like battery acid mixed with regret. That's the dream, right? Show up, smile, sign some documents, go home. Easy, simple, safe. Yeah, well, someone forgot to send that memo to the Galothian Empire. The Meridian Dawn had been cruising through neutral space for exactly 5 days when the first warning klaxons started screaming. 5 peaceful, blissfully uneventful days where the most exciting thing that happened was the coffee maker breaking down on day 3. Lieutenant Elena had been in the middle of her morning workout, actually enjoying the monotony, when the ship's AI announced in that annoyingly calm voice that they were being hailed by an Imperial Galothian vessel. Hailed. What a polite word for what was actually happening. Within minutes, the Meridian Dawn was locked in a tractor beam so powerful it made the hull groan like an old man getting out of bed. The diplomatic transport didn't stand a chance. Not that it was designed to. It was basically a flying conference room with engines, armed with nothing more threatening than strongly worded letters and passive-aggressive treaty clauses. Elena had made it to the bridge just in time to watch their captain, a nervous wreck of a man named Peterson, attempt to negotiate with the Galothian commander on the view screen. It went about as well as you'd expect, which is to say, not at all. The Galothians weren't interested in talking. They were interested in boarding, searching, and generally making everyone's day significantly worse. Under Article 15 of the Neutral Space Accords, you have no authority to— Peterson had started, but the transmission cut off mid-sentence. That's when Elena knew they were in deep, deep trouble. The boarding party arrived like a storm, all polished armor and weapons that hummed with enough energy to vaporize a small building. Galothians were impressive specimens. She had to give them that. Tall, easily 8 feet on average, with 4 arms and skin that shimmered like oil on water. Their eyes, 3 of them arranged in a triangle on their faces, glowed with an unsettling amber light. They moved with the confidence of apex predators who'd never met anything they couldn't crush. Commander Joel Mareth led the squad personally. Elena could tell he was the commander because his armor had more decorative flourishes than the others, all those little details that screamed, "I'm important," in every culture across the galaxy. He strode onto the bridge like he owned it, which, to be fair, he kind of did now. "All personnel will disarm immediately," Joel Mareth announced, his voice resonating through the universal translator with that particular tone of someone who's never been told no in his entire life. "Any resistance will be met with lethal force. You have 30 seconds to comply." The crew scrambled to obey, dropping weapons, tools, anything that could be remotely considered threatening. The ship's small security detail, all 5 of them, placed their sidearms on the floor with trembling hands. Captain Peterson looked like he might actually cry, which, honestly, Elena couldn't blame him for. This was supposed to be a routine trip. Elena stood near the back of the bridge, watching, calculating, her mind running through scenarios at lightning speed. She'd removed her obvious weapons already, her service pistol and tactical knife now sitting on the navigation console, but she hadn't moved from her spot, arms crossed, observing the Galothians with the kind of casual interest someone might give a mildly entertaining street performance. Joel Mareth noticed. Of course he noticed. 3 of his amber eyes locked onto her, and he gestured with 2 of his 4 arms. "You, human, step forward." Elena didn't move. Not out of defiance, really, just— She was still thinking. "I said step forward." Joel Mareth's voice carried that edge of irritation that comes from being used to instant obedience. Two of his soldiers shifted their weapons in her direction, the barrels glowing with increasing intensity. "Yeah, I heard you the first time," Elena said, her voice carrying that particular flavor of calm that makes smart people nervous. She finally uncrossed her arms and took a slow step forward, then another. No rush, no panic, just a woman taking a walk. The crew was staring at her like she'd lost her mind. Peterson's face had gone from about to cry to definitely about to cry, and also maybe pass out. But Elena kept walking, steady, controlled, until she was standing about 10 feet from the towering Galothian commander. "Disarm yourself," Joel Mareth commanded. "Now." And here's where things got interesting. Elena looked down at her belt, at the empty holsters where her weapons used to be. She looked back up at Joel Mareth, and the smallest smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Not a friendly smile, not a nervous smile. The kind of smile that should have set off every warning bell in the commander's head. "Already did," she said simply. Joel Mareth's eyes narrowed, all three of them scanning her from head to toe. His armor's sensors were probably doing the same, looking for concealed weapons, hidden threats, anything that might justify the feeling of unease that was starting to creep up his spine. He found nothing, because there was nothing to find. "Then why?" Joel Mareth said slowly, taking a step closer, towering over her by at least 3 feet. "Are you smiling, human?" Elena's grin widened just a fraction. "Who says I'm done being armed?" There was a beat of silence. The kind of silence that happens right before something goes spectacularly wrong. Joel Mareth's soldiers shifted, uncertain, their weapons trained on this small human who should have been terrified, but instead looked like she was enjoying herself. "Raise your hands," Joel Mareth ordered, his Ainthi voice dropping to something dangerous. Slowly. And Elena did. She raised her hands, palms out, fingers spread, lifting them up in the universal gesture of surrender. The crew sagged with relief. Peterson actually did let out a small sob. The Galothian soldiers relaxed, just a fraction, convinced that the strange human had finally seen reason. But Joel Mareth, he kept staring at those hands, at the way Elena held them, positioned just so, at shoulder height, perfectly balanced. At the way her stance had shifted, weight distributed, muscles coiled beneath her uniform like springs waiting to release. At the way she was still smiling. "Your first mistake," Elena said quietly, almost conversationally, "was thinking I needed weapons." And that's when Joel Mareth realized something that would have been really useful to know about 5 minutes ago, something that the Galothian Empire's intelligence reports had mentioned, but he'd dismissed as human exaggeration, as primitive species bragging about capabilities they couldn't possibly possess. Those hands she'd just raised? They weren't a surrender. They were a threat. The smile on Elena's face wasn't fear or nervousness or relief. It was anticipation. The same kind of look a predator gets right before the hunt begins, right before it reminds the world exactly why it's at the top of the food chain. Joel Mareth's fourth hand, the one he'd kept resting on his sidearm, started to move. His soldiers tensed, fingers tightening on triggers. The bridge's atmosphere shifted from tense to explosive in the span of a heartbeat. And Elena, hands still raised, still smiling, waited. Because here's something the Galothian Empire didn't understand about humans, something that every species that had ever underestimated them learned the hard way. Humans don't need weapons to be dangerous. Humans don't need technology or superior numbers or advanced tactics. Humans just need a reason. And Joel Mareth, in his infinite wisdom, his unshakable confidence, his absolute certainty that his species was superior in every measurable way, had just given Elena the best reason in the universe. He'd threatened her crew. The next few seconds were going to be educational. Let's rewind a bit, shall we? Because understanding what happened next requires knowing exactly who Elena was before she became a diplomatic liaison, which is possibly the funniest job title ever given to someone with her particular skill set. 3 years ago, Elena had been operating in the shadows, the kind of places where people don't ask questions, and survival depends on being faster, smarter, and significantly more ruthless than everyone else in the room. Special operations, they called it. Black Ops, when they wanted to sound mysterious. Basically, Elena was the person government sent when they needed something done that officially never happened. She'd been good at it. Too good, actually, which is why they'd eventually pulled her out and stuck her in a uniform, with the word liaison on her assignment papers. The official story was that her skills were better suited to building bridges between species. The real story was that she'd scared too many admirals who realized that someone with her capabilities probably shouldn't be operating without oversight. Good with her hands, her commanding officer had written in her file, which was technically true, but also possibly the understatement of the century. Elena's hands were registered as lethal weapons in 6 different star systems, a bureaucratic nightmare that had required mountains of paperwork and several very awkward conversations with galactic ethics committees. Most people thought it was a joke. A colorful exaggeration from humanity's early days in the galactic community, when they were still trying to prove themselves. Look at us, we're so dangerous. Even our body parts need licenses. Ha ha ha. Yeah, not a joke. Back on the bridge, Joel Mareth was starting to realize this fact in real time. Elena moved. Not fast, not yet. Just a slight shift in her stance that made every combat-trained instinct Joel Mareth possessed start screaming warnings. His hand completed its journey to his sidearm, fingers wrapping around the grip, starting to draw. He was fast. Credit where it's due, Galothians were evolved from apex predators, and Joel Mareth hadn't become a commander by being slow. But Elena? Elena was human, and humans had spent their entire evolutionary history being too slow, too weak, too small, so they'd gotten creative instead. They'd learned to think 3 steps ahead, to turn every disadvantage into an advantage, to win fights before they even started. Joel Mareth's weapon cleared its holster. Elena's hands, those raised, surrendered hands, snapped down and forward in a blur of motion. She closed the distance between them in a single step, inside his reach, where his superior height and longer arms became liabilities instead of advantages. Her left hand caught his wrist, the one holding the weapon, and twisted in a way that Galothian joints definitely weren't designed to bend. The weapon clattered to the floor. Joel Mareth's eyes widened in shock. All 3 of them. Then Elena's right hand formed into a strike that was part punch, part focused explosion of kinetic energy, hit him in the solar plexus, right in the soft spot between his chest plates. Galothians were tough, sure, but they still needed to breathe, and Elena knew exactly where to hit to make breathing really, really difficult. Joel Mareth staggered back, gasping. His soldiers reacted, weapons swinging toward Elena, fingers on triggers. She was already moving. What happened next would later be described by witnesses as a masterclass in applied violence, absolutely terrifying, and, by one particularly shell-shocked ensign, like watching a tornado made of fists and poor life choices. Elena ducked under the first energy blast, the superheated air singing her hair, and closed with the EE nearest soldier. These were elite warriors, trained from birth, equipped with armor that could withstand small explosions. They stood 8 feet tall with 4 arms each. Elena was 5'6" on a good day, armed with nothing but attitude and a really comprehensive understanding of alien anatomy. It wasn't even close to a fair fight. For the Galothians, she swept the first soldier's legs, a move that shouldn't have worked on someone that size, but absolutely did, because Elena understood leverage in ways that would make physics professors weep. As he fell, she used his armor as a springboard, launching herself at the second soldier. Her elbow caught him in one of his eyes, the middle one, and while Galothians had redundant visual systems, having one of them suddenly and violently darkened was still incredibly disorienting. The third soldier got smart and tried to grab her, using all 4 arms to trap her in what should have been an unbreakable hold. Elena responded by doing something to his left arm that made it bend in a direction arms definitely aren't supposed to bend. The soldier screamed and released her. The entire thing took maybe 15 seconds. 15 seconds from raised hands to 3 elite Galothian soldiers on the ground, groaning, weapons scattered, and one very confused commander trying to remember how to breathe properly. The bridge crew stood frozen, jaws dropped, watching their mild-mannered liaison casually roll her shoulders like she'd just finished a light warm-up. "You know," Elena said, breathing only slightly harder than normal, "this is exactly why I hate diplomatic missions. They never stay diplomatic." From the back of the bridge, someone started clapping. Slow, deliberate, the kind of clapping that's more commentary than applause. Everyone turned to see Dr. Fiona, the ship's xenobiologist, standing beside her workstation with a datapad in hand and an expression of absolute fascination on her face. "Magnificent," Fiona said, her eyes sparkling with scientific interest. "Absolutely magnificent. Commander, did you know that human muscle fiber is denser than Galothian by approximately 32%? And their reaction time? Oh, their reaction time is enhanced by a persistence hunting adaptation that allows them to process threats while maintaining physical activity at peak efficiency." Joel Mareth, still trying to get air into his lungs, stared at her like she'd grown a 5th head. Fiona continued, undeterred, tapping notes into her datapad. "And the pain tolerance, that's the real kicker. Humans have this fascinating ability to override their pain receptors through sheer willpower. It's tied to their adrenal response, you see. When threatened, they become temporarily immune to sensation that would incapacitate most species. It's really quite remarkable from an evolutionary standpoint." "Fiona," Elena said, her voice carrying a warning tone, "probably not the best time for a lecture." "Oh, but it's the perfect time," Fiona insisted, gesturing enthusiastically with her datapad. "The commander here is learning valuable lessons about assuming technological superiority equals combat superiority. This is groundbreaking research on interspecies conflict resolution." "This isn't research," Joel Mareth managed to wheeze out, finally getting enough air to speak. "This is assault on Imperial forces." "Technically," Fiona said, pushing her glasses up her nose in that way academics do when they're about to be insufferably precise, "it's self-defense. You did order your soldiers to use lethal force, which, under Galactic Convention 68, subsection—" "Fiona," Elena interrupted again, more firmly this time. The rest of Joel Mareth's boarding party had been standing in the corridor outside the bridge, waiting for the all-clear signal. They'd been patient, professional, secure in the knowledge that their commander and 3 elite soldiers could handle one small diplomatic vessel. Then they heard the screaming. 8 more Galothian soldiers poured onto the bridge, weapons charged, ready for a fight. They stopped dead when they saw their commander on his knees, 3 of their best warriors on the ground, and one human woman standing in the middle of it all, like she was waiting for a bus. "So," Elena said, looking at the newcomers with that same dangerous smile, "who's next?" For a long moment, nobody moved. The Galothian soldiers looked at their fallen comrades, at their struggling commander, at the small human who absolutely should not have been able to do what she'd just done. Their weapons stayed trained on her, but their grips were uncertain, their stances defensive rather than aggressive. They were afraid, not panicked, not routed, but genuinely uncertain about whether rushing her was a good idea. Then Jolmareth made his second mistake of the day. "Take her," he rasped. "Take all of them. Hostages. Now." What happened next was a blur of stunners and overwhelming numbers. Elena was good, possibly the best hand-to-hand combatant in the human fleet, but even she couldn't fight 8 opponents at once, while protecting a bridge full of civilians. She managed to take down 2 more soldiers before a stun blast caught her in the side, sending electricity coursing through her nervous system. She went down hard, muscles locked, vision swimming. Through the haze, she watched Jolmareth struggle to his feet, all 3 eyes blazing with fury and humiliation. "Cargo Bay 3, he snarled at his soldiers. "Secure her there, and someone get me a medical team before I pass out." They dragged Elena off the bridge, her body still twitching from the stun blast. Captain Peterson started to protest, but one of the soldiers pointed a weapon at his head, and he wisely shut up. Dr. Fiona, still clutching her datapad, watched them take Elena away. She caught the lieutenant's eye for just a second, and Elena managed the smallest nod. Just enough to say, "I'll be fine. Stay alert. This isn't over." Fiona nodded back, then very deliberately went back to her workstation, pulling up files like nothing unusual had happened. But her hands were shaking slightly as she typed, accessing the ship's database, pulling up every file they had on Galothian biology, technology, and ship systems. If Elena was planning what Fiona thought she was planning, they were going to need every advantage they could get. The soldiers herded the rest of the bridge crew into the conference room, weapons trained on them, while Jolmareth leaned against a console and tried to look commanding, instead of like someone who'd just had his entire worldview shattered by 5.5 feet of human stubbornness. "Sir," one of his soldiers said quietly, "should we inform the High Sentinel about what happened?" Jolmareth's eyes snapped to him. All 3 narrowed dangerously. "No, we handle this ourselves. The human got lucky, that's all. She won't be a problem anymore." The soldier nodded, but he didn't look convinced. None of them did. They'd just watched a human, unarmed, take down 3 of their best in under 20 seconds. Luck didn't cover that. Luck didn't explain the calculated precision, the intimate knowledge of their anatomy, the absolute lack of hesitation. Down in Cargo Bay 3, Elena was starting to regain control of her muscles. They'd secured her to a support beam with electromagnetic cuffs designed for beings much larger and stronger than humans, which meant they were solid, sure, but also designed with Galothian anatomy in mind. She tested the cuffs experimentally, feeling how they responded to pressure, finding the weak points in their design. Then she looked around the cargo bay, cataloging contents, spare parts for the ship's systems, maintenance equipment, random supplies for a diplomatic mission that was supposed to be boring and safe, and, bless the universe, a maintenance kit complete with a multi-tool, some wire, and what looked like industrial adhesive. Elena smiled, that same smile that should have warned Jolmareth, the smile that said someone had made a critical error in judgment. they'd left her alone in a room full of random objects and assumed she'd stay put. Never, and I mean never, leave a human alone in a room full of random objects and assume they'll stay put. Humans are persistence hunters, problem solvers. The species that looked at lightning and decided to bottle it. The species that fell from trees and learned to fly anyway. The species that got knocked down and invented 50 different ways to get back up again. Elena had about 30 minutes, she estimated, before someone checked on her. 30 minutes to get out of the cuffs, improvise some tools, and start causing the exact kind of chaos that would make everyone regret not just stunning her and calling it a day. She got to work. And for the first time since the Galothians had boarded, Elena started to have fun. Aboard the Galothian flagship, Eternal Dominance, which was absolutely a compensation name if there ever was one, High Sentinel Mothrigan sat in his command throne reviewing reports from the boarding operation. Everything was proceeding according to plan, which should have been his first warning that something was about to go spectacularly wrong. His personal comm chimed. Commander Jolmareth's face appeared on the screen, and Mothrigan immediately noticed two things. First, his commander looked like he'd been hit by a cargo hauler, and second, he was trying very hard to pretend he hadn't been. High Sentinel, Jolmareth said, his voice steady despite the visible bruising around his breathing passages. The diplomatic vessel has been secured. All personnel are accounted for and contained. Commander, Mothrigan said slowly, leaning forward, why do you look like you fought a war and lost? There was the briefest hesitation. Just a fraction of a second, but Mothrigan had led soldiers for 5 decades. He knew what hesitation meant. Minor resistance, Jolmareth said. Nothing we couldn't handle. Minor resistance that left you injured? The humans are more physically capable than initial assessments suggested. Mothrigan's 3 eyes narrowed. Explain. So Jolmareth explained. And with every word, every description of what had happened on that bridge, Mothrigan felt a cold weight settling in his chest. When the commander finished, there was a long, uncomfortable silence. Let me see if I understand correctly, Mothrigan said, his voice dangerously quiet. 1 human, unarmed, disabled 3 of our elite soldiers, and injured you in less time than it takes to recite a basic oath. She had training, High Sentinel. Advanced combat training. Our intelligence didn't— Our intelligence, Mothrigan interrupted, specifically mentioned a human named Elena, assigned to the Meridian Dawn. It specifically noted her background in special operations. It specifically warned that she was classified as a weapons-grade combatant by human military standards. He paused. Did you read the intelligence report, Commander? Jolmareth said nothing, which was answer enough. Mothrigan closed his eyes, all 3 of them, and tried to find patience. Where is she now? Secured in Cargo Bay 3. Electromagnetic restraints, full power. She's not going anywhere. Is she under guard? Another hesitation. The bay is locked. Motion sensors are active. If she moves, we'll know immediately. So that's a no. Mothrigan opened his eyes and fixed his commander with a look that had made lesser officers resign on the spot. You left a highly trained human operative alone in a cargo bay full of equipment. She's restrained, High Sentinel. The cuffs are rated for— I want guards on that bay, 4 of them, now, and I want visual confirmation that she's still secured every 5 minutes. Mothrigan leaned back in his throne. Make an example of the crew, Commander. Show them what happens when humans resist Imperial authority. But do not, under any circumstances, underestimate that woman again. Yes, High Sentinel. Jolmareth's image flickered out. Mothrigan sat in silence for a moment, then pulled up the intelligence file on Elena. He read through it slowly, carefully, paying attention to all the details that Jolmareth had apparently skipped. Combat certifications across multiple disciplines, decorations for operations that were still classified, a note that she'd once escaped from a Drexel prison facility that was supposedly escape-proof. And there, buried in the footnotes, hands registered as lethal weapons in 6 star systems following an incident on Rigel Station where she'd single-handedly stopped a terrorist cell using nothing but improvised techniques and what witnesses described as terrifying efficiency. "Ancestors preserve us," Mothrigan muttered. "He actually did it. He actually provoked the one human on that ship who could tear through our soldiers like paper." He opened a channel to Jolmareth again. "Commander, about those guards?" Static. Mothrigan's blood went cold. "Commander, respond." "Jolmareth, report your status." More static, then the line cleared. But it wasn't Jolmareth's face on the screen. It was one of his soldiers, looking panicked. "Hi, Sentinel. We have a situation. The human, she's—" The transmission cut out completely. Emergency alerts started flashing across Mothrigan's command console. 26 minutes. That's how long Elena had been alone in Cargo Bay 3. 26 minutes, which in human terms was apparently more than enough time to 1. Pick the electromagnetic cuffs using a piece of wire and some creative problem-solving that would have impressed a master thief. 2. Fashion a makeshift grappling hook from spare parts and that industrial adhesive she'd spotted. 3. Access the ventilation system through a maintenance panel that was supposed to be locked, but, let's be honest, no lock is really secure if you hit it hard enough with the right tool at the right angle. And 4. Disappear into the ship's ductwork like a very angry ghost with a very specific agenda. The first indication anyone had that Elena was loose came when a patrol of 2 soldiers turned a corner and walked directly into what could only be described as a booby trap. A maintenance cable, strung at exactly neck height for a Galothian, clotheslined them both with enough force that they were unconscious before they hit the floor. The second indication came when the environmental controls in Section 5 started fluctuating wildly. Temperature up, then down, then up again, humidity spiking, atmospheric pressure doing things that made everyone's ears pop painfully. The third indication was when Elena dropped out of a ventilation shaft directly behind a group of 3 soldiers, landed in a crouch that should have made noise, but somehow didn't, and systematically rendered all 3 unconscious with precision. Strikes before they even realized she was there. Jolmareth, now with 4 guards surrounding him at all times because he wasn't completely stupid, stared at the security feeds in growing horror. The human was moving through his ship like a predator, taking down soldiers with improvised weapons, avoiding patrols with an almost supernatural awareness of their positions, and generally making everyone's life miserable. "How?" he whispered. "How is she doing this?" Dr. Fiona, who'd been brought to the bridge for questioning and was currently flanked by 2 very nervous guards, adjusted her glasses and smiled. "Would you like the short answer or the comprehensive xenobiological analysis?" "I want to know how one human is dismantling my security forces." "Persistence hunting," Fiona said simply. "Humans evolved to chase prey across long distances, tracking them, learning their patterns, outlasting them. Your soldiers are reacting. She's thinking. They're following protocol. She's improvising. They're looking for a threat. She's already behind them." She paused. "Also, you locked her in a room with tools. That was your second mistake. Your first was threatening her crew." "I didn't threaten anyone," I'm following Imperial procedure. You pointed weapons at people under her protection, Fiona said, and her voice lost some of its academic detachment. That's a threat. And humans, Commander, are aggressively protective of their pack. It's a survival trait. Mess with one of us, you mess with all of us. On the security feed, Elena had just incapacitated another 2 guards using nothing but a wrench and excellent timing. She has no weapons, Joel Mareth said desperately. She's improvising with spare parts. How is she this effective? Because humans are tool users, Fiona explained patiently. We've been making weapons since we figured out how to bang rocks together. Give us 5 minutes and random objects, and we'll make something that hurts. Give us 30 minutes? She gestured at the screen. Well, you're seeing the results. Joel Mareth made a decision. Seal the corridors, lock down every section, flood the ducts with sedative gas. Sir, one of his officers said nervously, the sedative gas we carry is formulated for Galothian physiology. Humans have different respiratory systems, different metabolic rates. It might not. Do it anyway. They did it anyway. Gas flooded through the ventilation system, a sweet-smelling compound that would put any Galothian into peaceful unconsciousness within seconds. Elena, currently crawling through one of those ducts with a salvaged breather mask she'd found in an emergency supply closet, barely noticed except to think that the Galothians really should have checked their security footage more carefully before pumping gas into a system she was currently using as a highway. She'd made it to Section 3, right above where Fiona and the other crew members were being held. Time to even the odds a bit. The ventilation grate exploded downward, and Elena dropped into the corridor in a shower of metal and very purposeful violence. The 2 guards watching the conference room door barely had time to register her presence before she was on them, moving with that same precise, efficient brutality that had characterized every engagement so far. One guard went down to a strike to his nerve cluster. The other managed to raise his weapon before Elena grabbed it, redirected it into the wall where the energy blast left a smoking crater, and introduced his face to her knee with enough force that his armor's impact sensors registered a critical hit. She opened the conference room door. Inside, Captain Peterson and the rest of the bridge crew looked up with expressions ranging from shock to relief to, in one ensign's case, what could only be described as awe. "Everyone okay?" Elena asked, breathing only slightly hard. "You're alive," Peterson stammered. "They said you were secured, restrained, we thought." "Yeah, well, their restraints were rated for someone stronger but with different anatomy. Physics is a funny thing." She glanced at Fiona. "You good, Doctor?" "Oh, I'm excellent," Fiona said, pulling up her datapad, which she'd somehow managed to keep through the entire ordeal. "I've been gathering data on Galothian ship systems. I think I know how to make their lives significantly more difficult." "I like the sound of that. Their environmental controls are centralized, and they're designed for a species that evolved in high humidity, moderate temperature environments with specific light spectrum preferences. If we adjust those parameters to something more suitable for humans..." Elena's smile was predatory. "They'll be too busy being miserable to stop us from getting to the escape pods." "Exactly. But we'll need to access the main environmental control junction. It's 3 sections away, probably heavily guarded now that you've caused so much chaos." "Chaos is kind of my specialty," Elena said. She looked at the crew. "Everyone who can move, we're heading to the escape pods. Stay together, stay quiet, and if shooting starts, get behind me." "Lieutenant," Peterson said, finding some courage he didn't know he had, "you can't fight an entire ship by yourself." "Watch me," Elena said. Then she paused, softened just slightly. "Captain, with respect, They made this personal when they threatened my crew. I'm not fighting a ship. I'm protecting my people. There's a difference." Peterson nodded slowly. "What do you need us to do?" "Fiona and I will handle the environmental controls. You take everyone else and head straight for the escape pods. Move fast. Don't stop for anything. If you run into guards, surrender immediately. They won't hurt you if you comply." "What about you?" "I'll catch up. Trust me, I'm very motivated to get off this ship." She turned to Fiona. "Ready to make some aliens regret their life choices?" Fiona grinned, and it was the kind of grin that made her look less like a mild-mannered scientist and more like someone who'd spent way too much time around special operations personnel. "I thought you'd never ask." They split up. Peterson led the main group toward the escape pods, moving quickly and quietly. Elena and Fiona went in the opposite direction, toward the environmental control junction and whatever forces Jolmareth had stationed there. "So," Fiona said as they moved through the corridors, "on a scale of 1 to 10, how much trouble are we in?" 11, Elena said cheerfully. "But that's fine. I do my best work at 11. Behind them, alarms were blaring. Ahead of them, guards were mobilizing. And somewhere on the bridge, Jolmareth was probably having the worst day of his military career. The human was loose. She was armed with improvised weapons and a scientist who'd figured out how to weaponize atmospheric controls, and she was absolutely, positively not going to stop until everyone was safe. The Galothians had made a lot of mistakes today. Underestimating humanity was just the first one. Letting Elena get creative was the second. But the biggest mistake? They'd given her a reason to go full throttle. And when a human decides to go full throttle, to abandon caution and embrace that persistence-hunting, problem-solving, pack-protecting instinct that had carried them from caves to starships. Well, that's when things get really interesting. The environmental control junction was, predictably, crawling with Galothian soldiers. 6 of them, all heavily armed, all looking twitchy after watching their comrades get systematically dismantled by one very determined human. Elena and Fiona crouched in an access corridor, observing through a maintenance window. 6 guards, Fiona whispered. That's a lot of guards." "That's a compliment," Elena corrected. "They're scared. Scared people make mistakes." "What's the plan?" Elena smiled. "You know that thing where humans are really good at throwing stuff accurately because we evolved to chuck spears at mammoths?" "Yes." "Watch this." What followed was a demonstration in applied physics that would have made any ballistics expert weep with joy. Elena had collected an assortment of tools, spare parts, and one particularly solid wrench. She threw them in sequence, each projectile calculated for maximum chaos, each impact precisely targeted. The first wrench took out a light fixture, plunging half the corridor into darkness. The second hit a control panel, making it spark and smoke. The third, fourth, and fifth were aimed at the guards themselves, not to injure, but to distract, to make them turn, to break their formation. By the time the 6th guard realized what was happening, Elena was already among them. She fought like water flowing downhill, taking the path of least resistance, using their size against them, their confusion against them, their training against them. When they expected her to retreat, she advanced. When they bunched up, she slipped through gaps they didn't know existed. When they tried to grab her, she was already somewhere else. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't elegant. It was effective, brutal, and over in less than a minute. Elena stood among 6 unconscious Galothian soldiers, barely winded, and gestured to Fiona. "Junction's all yours, Doctor." Fiona rushed to the control panel, fingers flying across the interface. "Right. So, Galothians prefer 68% humidity, 72 degrees by human standards, and lighting in the amber-green spectrum. She grinned. Let's give them 20% humidity, 95 degrees, and full-spectrum lighting weighted toward blue-white. Make them feel like they're standing in a desert at noon. Will that hurt them? No, but it'll make them sluggish, disoriented, and deeply uncomfortable, like trying to fight with a migraine while dehydrated. She hit the execute command. There. Give it 5 minutes to spread through the ship. We might not have 5 minutes. As if on cue, the corridor's emergency doors slammed open. Jolmareth stood there, flanked by what had to be every remaining soldier on the boarding party. 12 warriors, all heavily armed, all looking at Elena with expressions that mixed fear and determination. And in the center, the commander himself, all 3 eyes blazing with wounded pride and barely controlled fury. "Enough," Jolmareth said, his voice ragged. "You've made your point, human. You're dangerous. We underestimated you. Congratulations. But this ends now." Elena stepped forward, putting herself between Fiona and the soldiers. "You're right. It does end now, with you letting us go. We have you outnumbered 12-1. 13-1, Elena corrected, gesturing to Jolmareth. "Don't sell yourself short. Though after our last encounter, I wouldn't blame you for sitting this one out." Jolmareth's mandibles twitched with anger. "I was unprepared before. That won't happen again." "No," Elena agreed. "This time you're prepared, which means you're scared. And scared people with guns are dangerous. But here's the thing, Commander." She took another step forward, casual, confident. "You want to know what makes humans dangerous? What really makes us dangerous? Enlighten me. It's not our weapons. It's not our ships or our technology. It's not even our ability to improvise, though that helps." Elena's voice dropped, intense. "It's that we spent our entire existence fighting our planet, which tried to kill us with weather and predators and diseases. Fighting each other, in wars so brutal they nearly ended our species. Fighting our own biology, our own limitations, our own fear. We're not warriors because we're naturally violent. We're warriors because we had no choice. We evolved on a world that demanded we adapt or die, and we chose to adapt. Every single time." The environmental changes were starting to take effect. The soldiers shifted uncomfortably as the temperature climbed and the humidity dropped. Their skin, adapted for moisture, was already starting to look dry. "And now," Elena continued, "you've given us a reason to show you what that means. You threatened my crew, my people, the ones I'm sworn to protect. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to let us walk out of here. You're going to let us get to our escape pods. And you're going to explain to your High Sentinel how one unarmed human made your entire boarding operation look like an amateur comedy routine. Or," Jolmareth challenged, "or I show you exactly how much damage a human can do when they stop holding back." It was a bluff, mostly. Elena was exhausted, running on adrenaline and stubbornness. She couldn't fight 13 opponents, not even with environmental conditions in her favor. But Jolmareth didn't know that. He'd watched her take down his soldiers. He'd felt her hands disable him in seconds. He'd seen the security footage of her turning his ship into a playground of improvised violence. And more importantly, he'd started to understand something fundamental about humans. They didn't bluff about protecting their own. When a human said they'd fight to the last breath for their crew, they meant it literally. The standoff stretched. Seconds felt like hours. The soldiers gripped their weapons tighter, waiting for orders. Fiona stood behind Elena, datapad clutched to her chest, trying to look brave. Then, From somewhere distant came the sound of escape pods launching. 1, 2, 3 launches in rapid succession. Captain Peterson and the crew had made it. Elena's smile widened. That's my people safe. Which means I've got nothing left to lose. So, Commander, what's it going to be? Joel Mareth stared at her. This small human who'd torn through his forces, who stood there exhausted but unbowed, who radiated absolute certainty that she would die before she let any harm come to the people under her protection. He'd been a soldier long enough to recognize when he'd lost. Not the battle, maybe, but something more important, the right to claim superiority. "Stand down," he said quietly to his soldiers. "Sir?" one of them questioned. "I said, stand down!" Joel Mareth's voice cracked with frustration and something that might have been respect. "Let them go." Elena nodded once, then gestured to Fiona. "Come on, Doctor. Time to leave." They walked past the soldiers, Elena moving backward, keeping her eyes on them the whole time. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They just watched as the 2 humans disappeared down the corridor toward the remaining escape pods. As they ran, Fiona laughed breathlessly. Did that actually just work? Told you. Scared people make mistakes. And we scared them good. They reached the escape pod bay. Empty now except for 2 remaining pods. Elena hit the launch sequence for the first one, then paused. "What are you waiting for?" Fiona asked. "Just enjoying the moment," Elena said. Then she activated the item second pod's external comm. "Joel Mareth, you still listening?" "Static, then." "I'm here. Tell your High Sentinel something for me. Tell him the humans aren't looking for a fight. We just want to be left alone to do our thing. But if someone pushes us, if someone threatens our people..." She paused. "Well, you've seen what happens. We push back. Hard." "Message received," Joel Mareth said, and he actually sounded tired. "For what it's worth, you fought well." "So did you. You just fought predictably. Next time, try being less by the book and more improvised. Might surprise your opponents. There won't be a next time." "Smart man." They boarded the escape pod. As it launched and drifted away from the Meridian dawn, Elena finally let herself collapse into a seat, exhaustion hitting her like a physical force. Through the viewport, they could see the cavalry arriving. 3 human fleet vessels dropping out of faster-than-light travel with perfect timing. The Galothian ships, probably wisely, decided not to engage and started pulling back. "That timing was awfully convenient," Fiona observed. Elena grinned. "Yeah, funny how that worked out." "Elena, tell me this wasn't all planned." "The whole situation? No. The ships being close enough to respond quickly? Well..." Elena shrugged. "Let's just say diplomatic missions to areas where tensions are high tend to have escorts. Distant escorts. The kind that stay out of sensor range but can respond if things go sideways. You were bait. I was insurance. Big difference. Command knew the Galothians might try something. They wanted someone on that ship who could handle it if they did." She stretched, wincing at sore muscles. "I handled it." "You certainly did." Fiona pulled up her datapad. "I got some excellent research data, by the way. This is going to make a fascinating paper on human combat effectiveness versus Galothian tactical doctrine." "Please don't make me famous." "Too late. You already are." The rescue ship retrieved them 20 minutes later. As Elena walked onto the bridge, the crew actually applauded. Captain Peterson rushed forward, looking like he'd aged 5 years in the past 2 hours. "Lieutenant, I don't know how to thank you." "Buy me a drink when we get back to base," Elena said. "A strong one. And maybe put in a request that my next assignment actually stays diplomatic. After today, You're going to be teaching hand-to-hand combat to every officer in the fleet. Elena groaned. That's what I get for showing off. Later, in the crew quarters, Elena sat with Fiona, each holding a drink that was definitely against regulations, but nobody was going to say anything. So, Fiona said, what did we learn today? That Galothians need better intelligence reports? That humans are terrifying when motivated? That raising your hands isn't always surrender? They clinked glasses, and somewhere, on the Galothian flagship, High Sentinel Mothrigan was reading Jolmareth's report and coming to a very important conclusion. Humans weren't to be underestimated. Not their technology, not their determination, and definitely, absolutely, under no circumstances, their hands. Because those hands, when raised, weren't surrendering. They were getting ready to remind the galaxy exactly why humans had clawed their way to the stars in the first place. By being too stubborn to quit, too clever to predict, and too protective of their own to ever back down. That's the human way. Always has been. Always will be. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why you should always think twice before asking a human to raise their hands. They might just be getting ready to knock your lights out.